We did read most of chapter 17. We did 1 through 19. What we looked at was 3 main sections of this prayer that I believe Jesus spoke. And I believe that his disciples heard it. I believe this was not an internal prayer. Not that when Jesus was off alone, when the Bible says that he, and we'll talk about this today, withdrew himself to go off to a mountain or to go off to a hill or by himself in a boat or wherever he might have been. There's no record of what he prayed. You ever notice that? Because that's his quiet time. That's his personal time with God. But there is a record of what he spoke to the apostles here in John chapter 17. And I believe that's because he spoke it. Not that it was above God to be able to give utterance to the writer to say this is what my son spoke. But at the same time, I believe this was spoken, just primarily because of verse 1. He says, Jesus spoke these words and lifted his eyes to heaven. In chapter 18, verse 1, he says, when Jesus had spoken these words. And so I believe these things were audible. And I believe the disciples heard them. And I believe that John wrote them down. I recently watched God's Not Dead, Part 2. I liked the first one. I really did. I watched it once by myself, kind of previewed it. I watched it with the family. This is the second one. I don't know if anyone's watched those movies or not, but I liked them. And it kind of helps. I had a crush on when I was about 13 on Melissa Joan Hart. Okay.
So did Michael.
But that's in the past. We've turned the page. Okay. By the way, I ran into, she looks a lot older. Okay, and she's my age. And I ran into a guy, one of Lydia's coaches that I went to Meadow Hill with. I couldn't say really friends with him, but I definitely knew him. And he's a coach, and I was looking at his face, and I got to see him. It took me a while to recognize him. He's got lines here, he's got some gray. I'm like, if that's my age, what's going on here?
Welcome to my world, Andrew.
I remember my mom said that she saw someone on Facebook that I went to high school with, and she looked a lot older, and I thought, but then, you know what I'm saying? So, but that's how you know that you're getting older, I think, is by looking at your peers.
Yeah.
But
Sometimes. I worked with 2 brothers. The oldest one is about 6 years older than the other one, and he looks like he's about 10 years younger than the other one.
See, that happens sometimes.
Yeah, I look a lot younger than Andy. You look like the oldest.
Well, it's lifestyle too.
Yeah.
It's like John's 3 years older than me, but he
Yeah.
looks
Oh,
about
yeah.
15.
Yeah. There's mileage too there.
Yeah.
There's mileage.
Hard miles.
So what we're talking about really is that, and I was going to bring this up about that movie, talking about where was I going? Oh, the gospel. So this whole second movie revolved around a trial in court, and one of the things that they brought out was it has to do with the teacher answering a question about historical figures, about Martin Luther King and about Gandhi, and then a student raised her hand and said, "Boy, that nonviolence tactic sounds a lot like Jesus." And the teacher, who's a believer, gives a response and says, and quotes some of the Beatitudes, and of course, nonviolence, blessed are, and all those things. And so he gives she gave that response. Well, of course, the student texted that and recorded it, and then they turned it into this big trial. Okay. But one of the witnesses that they called said he was an expert on the Gospels. And I think in real life he's the actual expert because he wasn't really good an actor, but he knew his stuff. So he actually is a scholar. He actually started off as an atheist and started to study because he's a forensic, what do they call it, a forensic document looking, forensic, what's the word I'm looking for?
Forensic analyst?
Yeah, like a forensic, like it's written though. Like a statement, forensic statement analysis, I think, analyzer, which means he takes witnesses' statements and forensically analyzes them. And this could be from decades ago or 100 years ago. Analyzes eyewitnesses' statements and draws a forensic analysis. He said the Gospels are written, and this is what he wanted to study because he wanted to basically in his mind prove or disprove. He says that the Gospels, the 4 perspectives, are written, exactly the way you would expect them to be written. With people having different perspectives of where they were in the room, of their proximity to Jesus, of the events that they took part of. So they actually were written exactly, they weren't cookie cutters. You would never expect that to be cookie cutters because the same people don't experience the same event the same way, nor are their writing styles the same. So he says the Gospels fit absolutely perfectly, and where John, John wrote his. They say that John wrote his epistle way after the others, and he wanted to present a side of Jesus that the others didn't. And so here in John 17, we get an example of that. Jesus, these words that John recorded are nowhere to be found in any of the other Gospels. This is John exclusive, if you will. And so we won't read all the chapter that we read, but let's just pick it up in verse 20, because I do want to get to 18 today. But Jesus, we'll take a look here. Verse 9 of 17 says, I pray for them. Who he's talking about? The apostles that were right in front of him. I do not pray for the world. Notice that? I think we talked about that. Well, we're going to talk about that again today, because it comes up again. He says, I'm not praying for the world in general. He says, but for those whom you have given me, for they are yours. Let's pick up that idea in verse 20. He says, I do not pray for these alone, who? The apostles, but for those who will believe in me through their word. Well, who's that? Well, that's us. That's every apostle. That's not apostle, but that's every church member that has existed since the time of this writing. That's who he's talking about, and that would include us. But it's not just for them. We're going to take a look here. And there's a little more well-rounded approach that we have to take. He's not just praying for, these are my believers, the ones I can see, the 11 that are in front of him, and just their descendants. He's not just praying for them, because these descendants are going to have to be taken from the world. You see, so there has to be kind of a combination there. So he says, I'm praying not only for these alone, but for those who will believe in me through their word, that they all may be one, as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. So he's not specifically praying for the world. He's praying for his believers to be a witness to the world. Mm-hmm. So he's not just blasting it out there, saying, I'm just going to throw a dart and see if it sticks. He's praying for the ones who already know, to continue that line, to teach others as they've been taught, and then those people will teach others and be a witness to, so that other people can come in, and this just keeps going. But, if I said that he wasn't praying at all for the world, that's not accurate. He really is praying indirectly, but he's praying specifically for his followers. But he's hoping and praying that they will lead others into the work. And so, we have to be balanced. Jesus didn't just die for his people; he died for the whole world. So, verse 22 says, "And the glory which you gave me, I have given them, that they may be one, just as we are one. I in them, and you in me, that they may be made perfect in one, and that the world may know that you have sent me, and have loved them as you have loved me." So once again, to be a witness to the world. It says, "Father, I desire that they also, whom you gave me, may be with me where I am, that they may behold my glory, with which you have given me, for you have loved me before the foundation of the world. O righteous Father, the world has not known you, but I have known you, and these have known that you have sent me. And I have declared to them your name, and I will declare it, that the love with which you loved me may be in them, and I in them." What beautiful words. Mm-hmm. This is a prayer that Jesus spoke so that they could hear it. And some of the ideas, and I'll just write them on the board. I grabbed 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I grabbed about 5. 5 ideas from John chapter 17. So it kind of, some of the words it kind of helps me just to pull out some of these things and just write them down. Just pulling ideas from chapter 17. So he doesn't want them. He doesn't want, what doesn't he want? He doesn't want God, his Father, to pull them out of the world. You ever notice that? Who can find that verse in that scripture?
He doesn't want to follow what?
He does not want his Father to pull them out of the world. If you find it, go ahead and read it.
I pray that 17:15. I pray not
that thou shouldest take them out of the world, but that thou shouldest keep them from the evil.
Exactly. So who can find this one? He wants them to be where he is. We can put the word forever, right? It's not the Da Vinci Code, I promise you, it's in there. No one knows where that is, huh? He wants them to be where he is forever.
Well, you're John, right?
Why can't I find it now?
This feels like Da Vinci Code.
The next one is 21, but they may all be one.
Okay, so you found that one. Yeah, well, I guess verse 24. So it says, Father, I desire that they also whom you gave me may be with me, where I am.
Oh, that would be it,
Yeah, where be, may be with me where I am, right? And we can say, we can put the word forever after that too. And so that's where I got it, was verse 24. And so he wants them to do what? He wants them to be with him wherever he is. Notice he's praying this. He's not making demands. See, Jesus always set the example for us. When we pray to the Father, do we make demands? Jesus, his own son, did not make demands when he's praying to his Father. And so he's praying, Lord, I'm asking you that these men and women and whoever else will be with me wherever I am. So he's praying that. So Sister Tani found he wants them to be one. He wants them to have his joy.
Would that be also chapter 14? You go back to that.
Yeah, and that, yeah, definitely. And one of the things I didn't do is write down the scripture reference, as you can tell.
Yeah, 14:3.
Yeah. And so he wants them, we'll just read them. You'll take my word for it, they're in there. He wants them to be one, he wants them to have his joy, and he wants them to be sanctified by the truth. And so if we can take some of those components, and those are the ones that really stood out to me from the Lord's Prayer, those are the ones that kind of boil it all down for me. Because he's desiring these things. He wants to be with us. He wants us to be separate. Did you notice, the very first one really stood out to me. He's saying, Lord, I don't want to pull them out of the world. He's saying, I gave them your word. They've kept your word, and that's made them different. I'm not desiring that you take them out of the world so that they're just suddenly, they just evaporate, and then, he wants to leave us there. He wants us to prove ourselves. He wants us to go through the pressure cooker of life, as it were. He wants to weed out the people who really want to be there from the people who don't. And if you suddenly just disappeared after you believed, what would that accomplish? How would you really test? You can sign a quarterback all you want, $30 million later, but if he hasn't taken a snap and proved himself, what have you really accomplished? Somebody has to get out there and it's fourth quarter and you're down by 4, you need a touchdown in the Super Bowl and it's 3 seconds left in that last play, okay? That's when you really earn your money as a quarterback or as a team player. But when you just have everything given to you, you don't really earn it. And so the Lord wants us to go through those events, never being righteous enough to deserve anything, But he wants us to go through those events. He wants us to go through that life. It's a weeding out process. We've always said the Lord only wants those that really want Him. And that's something that it's true.
Yeah,
You know.
that's right.
And so that's what stood out to me for John 17. Those are His desires for His people.
Brother Andy,
Yeah.
that joy one is on 17, 13.
Thank you. It says, but now I come to you, and these things I speak in the world, that they may have my joy fulfilled themselves. Thank you. You're absolutely right. We found all of them. All right, so let's go ahead and get into 18 here. There's a lot of rich stuff here in 18. And the last time, I don't know why I wrote this down, but I did. I'll just read it. John 11:45 tells us. Do you remember after Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead? That's when Jesus entered into Jerusalem for what? The very last time, right? That's when He entered to have the feast. Remember, all these events now are because He left for a while. Remember when His brothers went down to Jerusalem, they said, we want you to join us for the Passover, or for the feast. And He said, I don't want to go. I'm staying back. You guys go ahead. We talked about that. But then He eventually went. But then He went in secret. Remember all those events? Well, that's really what we're dealing with now, chapter 18. This is kind of the setting. Is Jesus is down now in Jerusalem and has been there ever since John 11, verse 45. And so this is the time after, remember, He was just outside the city of Jerusalem when he healed Lazarus, and now He's coming into the triumphal entry. Remember that in chapter 12? Where is He entering? He's entering into Jerusalem. For what? These feasts, these holidays. That's where He finds Himself. So He finds Himself there in chapter 12, 13, 14, 15, all the way to the end of the book, basically, all the way to the end of his life. This was His very last supper that He would observe with his disciples. So John really focuses half of his book on just those last couple of days, if you will. So a lot of the stuff that Jesus did and He records, a lot of it happens at the very end of His life. And so, for a reference, let's go ahead and let's not get into John yet. Let's get into Matthew 26. And you're going, what in the world are you doing? You're supposed to be in John. We're getting there.
What in the world are you doing? You're supposed to be in John.
I vocalized what he was thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
See how I did that?
Creepy.
It's almost like I have ESPN.
Or ESPN too.
That's right. All right, Matthew 26, verse 36. Remember what I was talking about, how John gives a different angle on stuff? I want to get Matthew's angle on this and then get John's angle, okay? Because Matthew includes this where John doesn't. John includes something that none of the other Gospels do. Okay, so if we put them together, we can kind of bookend this. So Matthew 26, verse 36, says, Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, Sit here while I go and pray over there. And He took with Him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, which would be James and John, and He began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. Remember, this is a parallel that we're looking at. Matthew, John, doesn't matter. We're just filling in the gap of what we just ended with 17, and before we start 18, this is right there in that pocket of time, okay? That's all we're doing, is we're filling in the gap that John leaves out. And so, what John doesn't include is this very story that Jesus began to be very, very sorrowful, and that Jesus took with Him three special, you can call them special ones, with Him even further. He took them all to the garden. They were in the garden. Then He took them, the three special ones, and said, go with me a little further. And then Jesus went even further, right? So they were separate from the rest of the apostles. And He took with Him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and He began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. Luke would include that He started sweating. His sweat became like great drops of blood, right? He's a physician. That would stand out to Luke, right? It wouldn't stand out to us. But in Luke's recounting of these things, and Luke's, when he put pen to paper and the Spirit moved him as a physician, he would be interested in knowing a condition that Jesus was, in filling that in. I guarantee you, if I go to someone's house, Hannah will remember the paint color, she'll remember the floor, she'll reference somebody like, oh yeah, that's right, yeah, he has a really nice Dell computer. You even noticed that? Yeah, and he also has a nice 60-inch OLED brand new technology TV as well. Whoa.
I got it.
You know? Well, why would I include that in my deposition or in my memoir or whatever? Is because I remember that. I'm interested in that stuff. Well, Luke, being a doctor, would be interested in knowing that about Jesus. And so what Matthew includes, he says that he is deeply distressed and he's sorrowful. Then he came to them, then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me." He wanted them to watch. He wanted them to stay awake. First of all, that's what that means, watching. You can't watch if you're asleep. It was nighttime. They had the meal. Their brains were probably very full from that very intense conversation. They're saddened, and when you're saddened, it makes you tired sometimes because you're emotionally spent. So they have all that going for them, and now they're awfully tired. And here's Jesus asking them to stay awake and just be there with him, even though they're not going to be there, physically with him. He has to go do this by himself, but they're going to just stay there with him and just be a companion. And he said, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me." He went a little farther, and he fell on his face. That's not I'm just going to sit down Indian style really nicely. That's just almost just collapsing of all the weight of the pressure on him and knowing what would happen to him and just all the things that I can't imagine. And so he fell on his face and he prayed, saying, "O Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping and said to Peter, "What, could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray lest you enter into temptation." And then I think he realized who he's really dealing with as far as people. And so he kind of understands, and he says, "The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." I know you want to watch. I know you want to be there with me, but your flesh is saying, as the scripture says, the eyes were heavy. That's what happens when you get tired. You can't keep your eyes, awake. You can't keep them open. And so again, a second time he went away and prayed, saying, "O my Father, if this cup cannot pass from me unless I drink it, your will be done." So you see, Jesus is wrestling with this decision. This, if nothing else, this will point to his humanity. Which one of us would ever want to go through what Christ went through willingly? You do that because you would have to, maybe. You committed a crime, or somebody died, and now you're being. But Jesus didn't do anything, yet he's willing to go through the penalty. And so, no wonder he's agonizing. No wonder he's just, struggling with this choice.
Well, and he knew what was coming too.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we go through things and it's a surprise.
That would be a disadvantage in
Yes.
this case.
Yeah, because he's stressing about it.
Yep. And that's that human side. If he was God and only God, and he couldn't feel any of those things, then he wouldn't be Jesus. But he did feel those things, and so that's his human side. That's the beautiful thing about it.
And I don't think the apostles fully knew what was coming, otherwise I
No.
think they would have been more alert.
No, they didn't know.
I think they were tired. I mean, they were physically fatigued, and I think the fact that they kept falling asleep, their eyes were heavy. I just see them as not aware of what was coming. Because I think they're alert after that.
Oh, they are.
When the arrest happens, I think they're awake and alert and ready to go, but I think up until then, I don't think they had any clue as to what was coming.
Yeah.
And especially Peter, I don't think Peter had any clue as to what was coming and how his night would end.
Right. And if he did, he wouldn't have said what he said.
No.
And so he's wrestling with this decision. He's saying, "Lord, if this doesn't have to be, then don't let it be. This doesn't have to happen, then don't let it happen." How many times have we prayed that? We don't really want to go through something. But Lord, if it has to be, give me the strength to get through it. Right? Well, Jesus had that same attitude, except he had it a billion times more intense than we did. Verse 43 says, "And he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away again and prayed the third time, saying the same words." 3 times he's asking the Lord, does this really have to happen? But every time the answer is yes. It's yes. And that third and final time is yes. But remember how he ends it. He's saying, "Not what I will, but it's what you want from me, Lord. It's what's best. And so what trumped Jesus' own physical desire to not go through with the cross? His desire to please God. See, that has to trump everything else in our lives too. It has to be number one, or else it's not going to be anywhere. And so if we don't put a desire to please God at the top, then he doesn't deserve to be anywhere on the list. And so Jesus had his priorities straight. He said, Lord, if this doesn't have to be, then please take it away. But it's not what I want at the end of the day, it's what you want. So he left them, went his way again, and prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then he came to his disciples and said to them, Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going, see my betrayer is at hand. So now, to me, it makes a little more sense when we go back to John 18. I had to wonder something, because John includes something that none of the other Gospels do. And I had to kind of wrestle with that, figure out, why would John include this very, very interesting thing that I've never really looked at? I've never studied it. I may have probably just glossed over it my whole life. We're going to take a look here. Chapter 18, verse 1 says, When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Sounds like Matthew, right? And Judas, remember, all of the stuff we just read in Matthew has just happened. Jesus had, taken the disciples in there. He had taken 3 of them with him. He had asked them to watch and pray. He's now struggled with this decision, coming back once, coming back twice. And now on that 3rd time, do you think he's struggling anymore? Do you think that he's made a commitment now? Do you think that he's made a decision in his heart to go through with this? Absolutely. The toughest decision he's ever had to make up until that point, and probably since then. Do I really go through with this? He went through with it, but I think at that moment, at that last time that he prayed, I think that's when he made the decision, I'm going through with this. We don't see him praying anymore. We don't see him asking the Lord to take it away from him. Who do we see? Don't we see a very calm, cool, and collected, healing the servant's ear, not speaking before the high priest as he's being accused? Don't we see those things? Don't we see a Jesus who's not defending himself? Don't we see the multitude of people they had to bring in to conjure up a lie against him? Well, the Pilate stood there and said, Why aren't you defending yourself? That's the Jesus we see. So we see that, to me, the intensity is going up and up and up, and then all of a sudden, he's at peace with his decision to go through with it that night. And I think God gave him that peace. I think he gave him that grace. And I think he's a changed person.
And I think you see the progression in Matthew. He comes out the first time, what are you doing? Like, be awake, be alert. After the second time, it doesn't seem like he says anything. Like, it seems like he lets them sleep.
Yeah.
And only after the 3rd time, because he could hear the rustling probably and Judas coming, does he wake them up.
Yeah.
And at that point, he's not like, come on, let's go. He's just like, it's time to rise.
It's time.
Because now it's time.
His hour's come.
And so you can see this progression in those 3 times. He saw them sleeping all 3 times. The first time seemed more aggressive. The second time, let me let them sleep because I know that there's one more time coming and then they're going to be here.
Yeah.
He's at peace with his decision
He's at
that
peace.
point.
And I think that this has helped me, to learn why John wrote what he did. But he says here, verse 2, it says, And Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place. Well, that's why he's getting paid, right? Because he's got inside track. For Jesus often met there with his disciples. Then Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers and, all sorts of people from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Why would they need lanterns?
It's dark.
Who is out of everybody was promised 30 pieces of silver to go turn Jesus over? Judas. See, when it's dark, and I didn't realize this, but when it's dark, you don't really see all that well with torches as you would in the daytime. And so I picture this happening, and I had to kind of replay this in my mind, but I picture Judas leading this procession of troops into the garden, and there's Jesus with all of his disciples, and it's dimly lit, and no one's talking. That's what I picture. I picture Judas going right up to Jesus. Why? Well, because Judas knew what he looked like even in the dim light. Soldiers don't know that. These other ones, they don't know that, or else they would have probably just gone right up and arrested him without him speaking anything, right? But Judas was the one that said, here's my sign, I'll betray him. It's the one I gave a kiss to. So he says here, verse 4, Jesus therefore, knowing all things, and I believe that Judas did go up to him and give him that kiss, but I don't think anybody knew really what to do at this moment. Jesus therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, whom are you seeking? Now there's two words in there that really stood out to me. Went forward. So you have all the clubs and the swords and the javelins and the soldiers and all that. I mean, this isn't Romans we're talking. We're not the Romans. We're talking about the Jewish, entourage of troops. Okay, they have their own palace guard and the chief priest and all that. That's who's out here to take him. So you have them on one side. I picture just silence. It's dark, busyness. Judas going up to Jesus, giving him a kiss on the cheek, telling them that's the sign, as he says, teacher. A deceptive kiss. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
A very deceptive kiss. And Jesus went forward. Have you noticed that? He's with his disciples, and he steps out ahead of them. And now he's presenting himself and saying, I'm here. Did you ever notice that?
He
went
stepped
forward.
out in front, almost to shield them.
And I think he did shield them, because he's asking them in a minute to let these guys go.
Mm-hmm.
But what I want you to consider is that Jesus went forward to be arrested. Do you remember when they wanted to make him king? He withdrew himself. He didn't want to be made king because it wasn't his time. So what did he do? He slipped into the crowd. And this time, that would be all the glory that he could have, right? I want to be king. I want you to recognize that I'm king. You guys want to make me king? That's what I want too. So he goes there, and he could have just said, "Yep, that's me." He could have stepped forward to receive his crown, right? He withdrew himself. But here's Jesus, ready to accept the crown of thorns, stepping forward and saying, this is me. This is what I want. See, this is who we serve. He wasn't ashamed to step out of the crowd and receive what he knew he was going to receive that night. And so I love this, how Jesus distanced himself from the disciples. And like you said, he's the pastor, he's the overseer of their souls. And he stepped forward to receive that, knowing who they wanted, knowing what they were going to do to him. He boldly stepped out. And I think that right there kind of explains the next thing that John records. And we'll take a look at that. So Jesus went forward and said to them, whom are you seeking? They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said to them, I am he. And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Who? Soldiers. So Judas is standing with the soldiers. Now when he said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Have you ever noticed that before? I never noticed that, ever. What in the world is that all about?
Well, just notice in here, in the text, that he is italicized.
Yeah.
Too, it's an add-on. I am he, I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it definitely goes back.
And you want to know, that's part of the answer of why the soldiers did what they did.
That's who fell to the ground when he
The
said-
soldiers fell to the ground.
These were Jewish leaders, this is Jewish leadership, they knew what I am meant.
Yes, absolutely.
They heard the word Jehovah.
Mm-hmm.
And they heard Jesus speaking the word Jehovah. Do you remember when the soldiers were commissioned by the Pharisees to go and arrest Jesus? And they went back and said, you've got to listen to this guy. Nobody has spoken like him. No one speaks with the authority that he speaks with. And they didn't come back with Jesus. And he said, "What, do you want to be his disciples too?" The soldiers are the same soldiers that listened to him that day. And the soldiers are the ones, when they heard, "I am he," they saw the boldness with which Jesus displayed. They heard the word Jehovah, like Noah pointed out. They couldn't help themselves but fall back. We got from this position with the spear or with the sword, they stepped back and they just knelt down to the ground. You don't have that kind of reaction if you're not convicted about who this person is you're about ready to arrest. And so why didn't the soldiers recognize him? Even after Judas, who recognized him even in the dim light, kissed his cheek, why didn't they bind him? It could be that the severe calmness by which Jesus spoke the words, "I am," stunned them. It could be that they recognized his voice from all the sermons that he gave. It could be that they were in awe that he would give himself up so easily after so many elusive times over the years. Or it could be that they knew instinctively that this was no mere man. The soldiers who had heard him preach exclaimed, "No man ever spoke like this man." These weren't Roman soldiers who were numb to these words. These were Jewish soldiers. And so when I read that, I thought, why would they, first of all, who's the ones that stepped back and fell down? It's the soldiers. They're the ones who were stunned by what they were hearing, stunned by what they saw. The other Gospels don't include this. But John always wanting to point to the deity of Jesus, to the calm demeanor of Jesus. Who, when they're arrested, walks forward and says, "It's me. Let these other ones go." That's just amazing. And I think it stunned the soldiers that night into a temporary awestruck.
You know, I'm thinking of Samson and how they would bind him with different materials, different ropes and chains, whatever. And he knew that he could break out of them any moment. So they're thinking, "Hey, we got him," you know, and he might be walking along with him for a little bit, and then he just breaks it. And what's interesting is, what this garden scene shows is that you're not taking just an ordinary criminal into custody, so now you own me, I'm yours, I'm at your mercy. With this one word, he controls these soldiers. He has power over this military, okay, the temple guards.
And doesn't it show that they didn't have to go and grab him from the crowd, and he went out there and stepped forward. No man takes my life, I give it up freely. Right? Even on the cross, they didn't put him to death. They didn't have to kill him after he came down from the cross. He was already dead because he had given up his spirit. And so what we see is that Jesus is manning up, if you will, and he's the one who steps forward and says, "It's me."
Right, and he, as always, he aligns himself with the Father. You know, in Exodus we see Moses asking, well, when they ask who sent me, children of Israel, he said, "You tell them I am that sent you." And so when he uses those words, that's aligning himself with the Father. These soldiers and the leaders and everyone who was there, they knew what I am meant. And they knew the importance of that term. And they knew how that was revered with Moses, and how he used that term. So he's standing before Pharaoh, which is still their country's greatest victory, and he's standing before Pharaoh and he says, "I am sent me." When Jesus comes out and says that, he doesn't say, "Yep, it's me." You know, he uses the term "I am," on purpose to align himself with the Father, and as you said, to really control the situation.
And nobody was just going to arrest him and everything just without his authority. And like I said, authority being the key word there. I do believe that when Moses asked the question and God answered him, I think that was the first time that Jehovah was used in the Bible. I could be wrong about that. And so they drew back and fell to the ground. Then he asked them again, "Whom are you seeking?" Can you imagine that? He says, "Who do you want?" He steps forward and answers the question, or he says, "I am he, I am." They fall back, and they still haven't gotten him. So it's almost like he's standing out there still in front of everybody, and he's saying, "Who did you want?"
He's making it easy for him.
Yeah, well, and he has to ask it twice, because they didn't arrest him. Normally they say, "Well, who is it? It's me." Okay, handcuffs go on, okay? But he's standing there, and they all fall back, and they're on the ground now, and nobody's making a move. So he has to ask them again. Then he asked them again, "Whom are you seeking?" And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I have told you that I am he, that I am. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way. Sticking up for him like any good shepherd would do. What did Jesus always say in John 10, The hireling, he flees. The guy that just is hired for the day, when the attacker comes, when the wolf comes, he's out of there. He doesn't have any vested interest in the sheep. It's a day job for him, right? He doesn't care. But the shepherd, if he was there, he'd give his life for the sheep. Jesus is doing that very thing that he said that a good shepherd would do. He's giving his life for the sheep. And so he says that they might be fulfilled, that the saying might be fulfilled, which he spoke, of those whom you gave me, I have lost none. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, I just picture this, like there's silence. Peter is now, and James and John, and all the other disciples are now full awake. They see the temple guard, and you're nervous when you see that, swords and clubs, and you see that event. You're now wide awake. You're standing with Jesus. He's standing out in front. He's now announced 2 times that I'm he. Now, they're about ready to arrest him, and you know what's coming. Well, Peter's not, that's not good enough for him. He's going to take that sword. This isn't going to happen. Isn't that what he always said? Isn't that why Jesus said, get behind me, Satan? It's because Peter said, that's not going to happen to you. You are not going to be captured. You're not going to be killed. And he'll make sure of that. If he has to take a sword out and cut and start this war, he's going to make sure of that. It's one of the last times that Peter gets rebuked by Jesus in the New Testament. And Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? That's the solidarity that Jesus came to that night in the garden. He came to a decision that said, I'm going through with this, doesn't matter what. I'm going through with this, and it doesn't matter who stands in my way, I'm going to do this. And when he came and arrived at that choice, calm as can be, he said, Peter, put the sword away, it's not how this is going to unfold. Picks up the servant's ear, we learn from another gospel. It says, permit even this. Don't hit me while I'm down on the ground here. Don't permit this, please, soldiers. And he picks up the ear and puts it back on the man's face.
I wonder what the guy that got his ear cut off, what he thought about that miracle when everything was going on.
I don't know.
We've often said, I think the pastor has said this more than once over the 85 years he's been a pastor. And the 85 years that I've listened to him be a pastor. He has said that this soldier is probably like, I'm gonna go. Like, I'm out of here. Like, this is a little different than the typical guys we arrest. This guy just picked up my ear that was flopping on the ground and put it back on my head.
It's not a fish.
Like that's how I pictured it's kind of flopping around. Picks it up, bloody and whatever, puts it right back on there. And I doubt that there were stitches and evidence that it had never been cut off. It was probably exactly how it was 20 seconds prior.
Yeah.
And so I as Sister Julie asked, I think we hope and maybe look back and maybe sort of think about this, that maybe he developed a faith because of that. A faith that clearly he didn't have if he was going out to arrest him, but between maybe it was he that went back and said, this guy speaks like no one else, and there was already something there. Then Peter cuts his ear off and he's like, okay. And we don't know what he later became,
Right.
but we pray that these 2 events in which he was involved in changed his life.
Yeah.
And he believed in what Jesus was preaching.
Yeah. And not only was he a witness that night, one last witness for Malchus, but he was a witness that everybody saw him.
Everyone else saw it too, yeah.
And so I think it's just add that to the cart of, hey, all the miracles he had done hundreds of thousands of miracles over the course of his life. And here was just one more. But it was the timing in it. The timing was amazing.
I'm curious as to why they named who he was. Because he doesn't show up anywhere else.
Yeah.
Right.
It says later on in John that he was related to somebody that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So it kind of you know, and the Bible is, you know, it's not just gonna, it has proof to it, too.
And that's what it was
Yeah.
my thought, maybe
Yeah.
that would just sets that in a person's brain.
Right,
Yes,
right.
that actually did happen.
Exactly, yeah, and there's that, and yeah, it's just, so it's not just like he's making a character up and
Right,
everything.
right.
This person had a family, this person had a history, you know, and hopefully a future as well.
What's interesting is in just a short few hours, he's gonna be standing in front of the high priest. He just healed his nephew's ear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If that nephew would've said something, hey, Uncle Priest, this is, probably should,
I think events were set in motion that just,
Yeah.
they
Well,
were
and-
so angry.
And I think, I mean, the impossibility of why and how Jesus was arrested is so beyond, I mean, there's no evidence of anything, they're not arresting him on anything substantial.
Right.
They're not even, they have nothing to even approach him on.
They had to fast track everything they did.
Right, and so this was all fabricated, and we all knew this because here's the Son of God without sin. So certainly there's not gonna be any crime or any evidence against anything wrong that he
Right,
had done if
right.
he had never sinned.
Until you
So-
twist his words, take them out of context,
And
just
then-
how they got him.
Yeah, which is how they finally ultimately had cause to arrest him.
Right, at least in their minds.
Yeah.
And that's simply because they didn't understand what he said.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I guess just one last thing before we go. One of the very interesting things, and I really appreciated Brother Braden and his parallels. I mean, to show you that how much is packed into just the first 3 chapters of Genesis. He preached 3 long sermons on that and a lot of parallels. Wonderful. And I think there might be another one. And let's take a look here. I want you to consider the parallels between the Garden of Eden and the Garden of Gethsemane. I'd never put those two in my mind at all, ever. Have you ever thought about those? Okay, let's talk about that. I'll just read what I wrote. It was in the garden. Now, who would say that the snake could just talk on his own? I don't think so. I think the earth was new enough to know that, you know, Adam didn't really have everything down and what should or should not happen in nature. Okay. What or who made the snake talk? Who? Satan. You wouldn't argue that the snake was possessed, right? And he did what? Deceived Eve. Nobody would argue that, right? Because we know that's the story. But what about when we get to the Garden of Gethsemane? Don't we see that Satan entered Judas Iscariot right after Jesus gave him that piece of bread? Wouldn't we say that he was possessed at that time? And wouldn't we say that he came into the garden that night and he gave Jesus a deceptive kiss with his mouth? That to me is a parallel. You have the snake possessed by Satan. You have Judas Iscariot possessed by Satan, entering into the garden. A garden where everything started. You have those two meeting together. And it doesn't stop there. It was the garden where, after all that happened, the Garden of Eden, that Jesus was promised. Remember, the Redeemer was promised to come. He shall bruise your heel, but you shall bruise his head. There's a Redeemer out there. Brother Braden preached on that Redeemer that was promised. That day in the Garden of Eden. And it was in a garden that the Redeemer stepped forward and said, I'm here. And so that promise that was made in Genesis, that a Redeemer would come, was fulfilled in the Garden of Gethsemane during his final hours of freedom, if you will, before he was whisked off to the trial and then the cross and everything. I never really understood or put that together. That's a very, very interesting parallels between the Garden of Eden and the Garden of Gethsemane. The fact that they're both in gardens is not a coincidence. When you see that in the Bible, don't chalk it up to a coincidence. And so the fact that the Satan possessed the snake and wanted to do evil and wanted to enslave mankind with sin. Judas Iscariot wanted to bring Jesus into captivity, and he was demon-possessed himself. So, to me, the parallels are rich. And I never thought about that, but So likewise, it was in the garden that the promised Redeemer freely gave himself. And so what God promised, it was fulfilled. So, I'll just leave you with those thoughts. Does anybody have anything? I guess I didn't realize how much chapter 18 would mean to me. And then I started really getting into it. And then next week we'll take a look at his actual trial. And then, what happens to Peter. And I'm just looking at these subheadings. And of course, it's all about the trial.
He's got 2 trials coming up.
We've got 2. Yep, he's got one before the Jews and one before Pilate. So hopefully we'll get in more into that next week. Anybody have any questions?
I think ironically, the one before the Roman was probably a more sincere, let's get to the bottom of this hearing versus the Jewish one, just a kangaroo court.
Well, they had an ulterior motive. Pilate genuinely wanted to find out what he did. And from what little that he heard, he said, this guy's he's not guilty. What are you doing? First he tried to say, you just take him and you judge him according to your law. He knew they had a law, the law of Moses. He knew that. He knew they had that law that they, lived by. So you guys have to do that. This is your problem. We're making it your problem because we can't put anyone to death. That doesn't make sense.
If Judas knew that that's where Jesus and apostles would be, it means that they frequented
And they did?
that garden. I wonder if Jesus had the thought every time they went there that this is where the beginning of the end would be.
Yeah.
And the anguish and pain. Because it says he prayed for that, I'm away from you for an hour. So I think these were hours. The prayers, I think, were probably a few hours in between going and seeing that the apostles had slept. And so I picture this, like this minute by minute discourse and begging of his father, if it's your will to take this cup from me, then do it. So I think there was anguish, and I think, as is sort of depicted in the Passion of the Christ movie, I think the devil was there just nipping at him nonstop, trying to get him to stop what was coming. Because I think that's what the devil does, is he was there in the garden just like he was with Adam and Eve, kind of yipping at him, just nonstop convicting him and pushing and trying to stop what was going to happen. Because he knew once Jesus overcame death, there was a path for all others.
Right.
And so that meant that the devil couldn't win, ultimately overcome. He tried in Matthew 4, now he's trying at the end to try to get him.
And that was his last ditch effort, I think. I think after that, it's over, because he knew that once Jesus, leading up to that struggle, once he made the decision to go through with it, there's no stopping him at that point.
He only had a couple hours left.
If you're a leader and you've been training these people for 3+ years, and now you're arrested and you're watching them scatter. Of course, he said, let them go, they haven't done anything, but then they scatter. Now you're by yourself. I mean, any human, that would be deflating. That all the wind would be out of his sails as far as his cause. His closest followers have just abandoned him. So the devil's nipping at Jesus, trying to discourage him right off the bat.
Right. And he doesn't stop there, and he tried to discourage Peter from serving.
Well, and then the only record of him seeing anyone during the torturous part prior to the cross was that probably heartbroken look that he gave to Peter. I mean, there's no other record of him seeing any of the apostles until he sees John at the end, but there's no other record. The only apostle who's there and probably lingered was Peter, and Jesus gives him this heartbroken look. That's the only one he saw.
Yeah, and
Was that
John
what happened?
John knew the high priest. He kind of knew that family, so he was allowed in. So John was. I think the others really did scatter. John was allowed in behind the gate where all this was going on. So he was in there, and then John comes and speaks to the girl that was keeping the gate and says, I know him. Come on in. Well, that same girl that let him in said, I know you, Peter. You're the one that was with him, or I know you. You look familiar. You were with him. He wasn't standing behind, Thomas and Bartholomew, and Peter's out there, so he's very visible. But I think Peter and John both were able to see him, to some degree. Because if Peter was there, I think John was probably there too. And then you see at the cross, that John was there, as well as, John was there, I should say. Yeah, so, much more to get into next week. Let's go ahead and dismiss it. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, that you've made a way, Lord, for us to come back, Father, to you, to bring our sacrifices today, and to offer up, Father, these gifts that you've given to us. And we're very thankful, Father, for the gathering and for the gathering of saints, Lord. We do pray, Lord, that the other assemblies that are meeting today, that they would also do so, Father, in a spirit of oneness and a spirit, Father, of humility as we open up the Word and as we sing. I pray, Lord, that all things would point to Jesus and that all things, Father, would glorify Him. We ask that you would answer these requests and bless these who are gone from us today. Bring them back to us the next time we meet, we pray. All this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Yeah.
That voicemail.
Asher, look,
You think she wants to phone in?
fake. Real. Asher, that's mine.
I know.
Hello.
Good.
No, Asher's real, that's real.
Told him to tuck it into his vest.
Okay, my turn. So let's do the light sticker. Asher, now real Asher, look.
Get insurance.
Asher, real. Asher.
Camper.